Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Co-hosts of the Conference on Supporting Syria and the Region, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the co-hosts for organizing this much-needed initiative to deepen the understanding of and garner international support for the peoples of Syria. Alongside all those present here today, I am deeply distressed over the indiscriminate and widespread devastation of life and property, including that of irreplaceable cultural assets, which are the manifestation of Syria's stunningly rich pluralistic history. The Arkan Development Network, which is the Ismaili Imamate's global agency for supporting development, is fully engaged with the peace process under UN leadership and is firmly committed to helping build a Syria that continues to respect pluralism, remains secular, and embarks on a political process led by Syrians. AKDN's development and humanitarian work in Syria began many years before the war. In the present situation, we have committed resources and efforts to ensure that internally displaced people receive humanitarian assistance and are supported to sustain their livelihoods. We are taking two approaches. First, we are supporting local community leaders, teachers, doctors, engineers, and others to foster stability, protecting their families and their communities. We are thus building and strengthening civil society to take as much responsibility as possible for their own future. Second, we are investing in communities by supporting agriculture, income generation, early childhood education, schools, and hospitals. We also provide vocational training to create skills. Our goal is to sustain hope. We aim to meet the urgent needs of the present, but where also possible, to protect and strengthen the foundations for the future. We seek to create islands of stability where there is public consensus in the face of war. It is my conviction that islands of stability can be replicated wherever security permits. Investing in them will help prevent displacement of people and anchor communities that would otherwise flee as refugees. Since the onset of conflict in 2011, AKDN has dedicated $50 million towards these endeavors in Syria and is now committed to increasing this investment to $200 million over the next 4 years. Our efforts will expand to wider areas of the country. Our goal is peace, stability, and reconstruction.
Finally, I would like to say that I feel this is a great challenge for me because of my age and also because of the enormous magnitude of the task that my office faces with this endemic problem of refugees, which is so closely linked with historical developments in our world, and with the help and with the assistance of all the members of the international community whether they are governments represented here in this organization, governments that are not members of this organization, voluntary agencies, specialized institutions, and all the various partners that my office has worked with, is working with, and will continue to work with in this great task of solving the refugee problem.
Now a postscript on another story from Africa, the plight of the Asians expelled from Uganda at the end of last year. There were 45,000 Asians affected by President Amin's expulsion order. It was left to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to take them under its wing and find them new homes. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, most of these families are now being reunited.
The job of my office is to make sure that asylum continues to be given generously, and hopefully not only temporarily for a limited number of weeks, but also permanently for people who can stay. So I think we have to adopt a flexible attitude, and we have to help human beings in need. And this has been the policy of the office, and we intend to continue to implement it.
We take him, take it out, and then we send him back under our protection. He's the only boy here who has a bullet which has not been removed. Let's just put him in our car, take him, get the thing done. He's obviously quite...
Yali Madat, welcome, bienvenue. Welcome to Friday Night Reflections. Bienvenue à cet épisode de Friday Night Reflections. Je m'appelle Kamal Hayat et c'est un plaisir pour moi d'animer l'épisode de ce soir. Khush Ahmedid de Friday Night Reflections. My name is Kamal Hayat, and I would like to extend a warm welcome to Jamati members, multi-faith family members, and everyone else who is watching from across the country or around the world. I am joining you today from my home in Laval, Quebec, where it seems like life is becoming a bit more normal, as few restrictions are being lifted in our province. For example, as of this week, gatherings of 10 people are allowed in homes, and museums, restaurants, movie theaters, and gyms are slowly reopening. I am excited to be hosting this evening's episode, which will honor our community's history of immigrants. This topic is particularly close to our hearts, as all of us can relate in one way or another to the immigrant experience. For example, I myself am a first-generation Canadian, as my parents immigrated from Pakistan. My husband, on the other hand, immigrated from Afghanistan. And here we are today in Canada, raising a family of our own, blessed with all of that this country has to offer. Tonight, we will explore faith perspectives on immigration and refugees, learn about what our institutions are doing currently to help Jamati members who are displaced, and learn about where we, as a community, can go from here. Tonight is also the season finale of Friday Night Reflections. With the weather getting better and life moving more towards normalcy, and Jamat is accepting more people, this is our hopeful note. But don't worry, we aren't going to leave your Friday nights completely open, but I'll get to that later in the show. I would also like to express a note of congratulations to Dr. Ulrike Al-Khamiz on her recent appointment as the CEO and director of the Al-Rahim Museum in Toronto. Her recent appearance on Friday Night Reflections highlighted some of the excellent work the museum is undertaking, and we pray for her continued success in this role. We are extremely fortunate to be joined by Dr. Zahra Jamal this evening. Dr. Jamal is Associate Director at Rice University's Banyuk Institute for Religious Tolerance. She has served on the faculty at Harvard, MIT, University of Chicago, Michigan State University, and Palmer Trinity. Dr. Jamal founded and directed the Civil Islam Initiative at the University of Chicago and the Central Asia and International Development Initiative at MSU. She was previously Associate Director of the Center for the Study of American Muslims at the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding, where she is currently a fellow. Dr. Jamal received a PhD in Social Anthropology and Middle Eastern Studies from Harvard and a double BA in Slavic Studies and in Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies from Rice. She joined the Institute in 2015.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The year was 622 AD, and diverse tribes of Medina were warring among themselves, and they had invited Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him and his family, to arbitrate their disputes. During this time, religious persecution of the Prophet and his companions had intensified in Mecca, so they made the treacherous journey to Medina for safety. The flight from Mecca to Medina is so significant that the Islamic calendar year begins neither with the Prophet's birth nor with the first revelation, but rather it begins with this event known as the Hijra, or migration. In fact, migration is central to Islamic belief, history, and practice, in response to the divine call in the Quran to protect the sacrality and dignity of human life. In an esoteric sense, migration is a spiritual concept related to the Islamic view of human life and the soul. In the Quran, God says all of us were created from a single soul. This suggests that the original home of humanity is actually heaven. If we think of Hazrat Adam, the father of humanity, as having migrated from heaven to earth, then all human beings are immigrants in a cosmic or spiritual sense. The earth is a temporary stop while our souls take human form. And everything we have in this world, such as life itself, time, knowledge, our families, the earth, our material wealth, all of these things actually belong to God. He has entrusted these gifts to us as custodians or stewards, and we are meant to use these divine trusts to improve the world and to help our souls and each other's souls return to and reunite with the divine origin, the same single soul from which we all came. If we think about it, if God owns all lands, and we are simply its custodians and not its owners, then none of us has the right to deny the refuge to others, to God's children on his land. Further, Quranic revelation shows us that migration is part of human history, and that migrants and those who help them each have certain rights and duties. For example, Muslim scripture recounts how God helped prophets Abraham and Moses, as well as the early Muslims, when each escaped persecution. The Quran reminds believers that God will also help those who fulfill his commandments regarding migration. So what are some of those commandments? Well, among them are that the oppressed have the right and the moral duty to flee and to seek protection in order to preserve their lives and their God-given dignity. In fact, in the Quran, God refers to the Muslims who fled from Mecca to Medina not as refugees displaced by circumstance, but rather as emigrants who fled by choice. Muslim scripture also explains that helping the oppressed, regardless of their religion or belief, is a duty, a blessing, and an act of justice. Many verses outline how migrants should be granted the same rights as their hosts. They implore helpers to give additional support to women, children, and vulnerable groups, be they alone or with their families. With these commandments are also cautions. God warns that those who do not provide humanitarian relief are condemned. But he also warns migrants and others against dependency and urges them to become self-reliant. Now you might wonder how Muslims have lived out these sacred commandments in practice. Returning to the story of the Hijrah, the Prophet paired each Muslim migrant from Mecca with a Muslim helper from Medina to ease resettlement. After everyone had been paired, Hazrat Ali's eyes welled up with tears. He slowly approached the Prophet saying, quote, "You have not paired me with a brother," end quote. Prophet Muhammad replied, "You are my brother in this world and the hereafter." Through this beautiful exchange, the Prophet showed how the pact of brotherhood created spiritual solidarity among the Muslims of Mecca and Medina, despite any tribal, kin, or ethnic differences, and that this brotherhood was one that would last in this world and in the next. Now, as you might imagine, the Meccans arrived with nothing. No clothing, no food, no shelter, no money, no jobs, and for some, no family. And the Medinan Muslim helpers were themselves destitute, but they were deeply committed to God and to his Prophet. So despite their poverty, they shared all that they had with the Meccans. They shared their wealth, their homes, their jobs, their food, their farms. While one person worked, the other sat at the Prophet's feet for religious guidance and shared new revelations with their working brethren at dusk. To curb dependency, the Prophet encouraged Meccan migrants to work to support themselves and also to pray for their hosts and to praise their generosity. Similarly, over the centuries, Muslims have sheltered Jewish refugees escaping the Spanish Inquisition, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Holocaust. And they have also given safe harbor to Christians evading Ivan the Terrible's reign. This same legacy continues to the present. By 2009, Muslim countries house 1 out of every 4 refugees or displaced people in the world. Since 2016, the Muslim nation of Turkey hosts the most refugees and spends the largest percentage of its national budget on refugee aid in the world. Against this inspiring backdrop of Muslim communities, empires, and countries providing refugee relief, it's noteworthy that the Ismaili Imamate helped advance the contemporary global refugee infrastructure we know today. Following World War I, Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah, the Aga Khan III, served the League of Nations first as a member and later as president in the 1930s. During his tenure, the International Office for Refugees was established to oversee the resettlement of war refugees. This office created something called the Nansen Passport, which allowed stateless people, like the refugees, to travel between countries in a new era of nation-states that required such documents to move between them. For its valiant work, the Office for Refugees received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1938. When the League was replaced by the United Nations after World War II, Sir Sultan Muhammad Shah's son, Prince Sadruddin Aga Khan, became the youngest ever and longest serving High Commissioner for Refugees at the UNHCR. He led the UN through the 1971 Bangladesh crisis, which uprooted 10 million people, including members of our community. The 1972 exodus of hundreds of thousands of Hutus from Burundi to Tanzania. The Indo-Chinese boat people tragedy of the mid-1970s. And the expulsion of tens of thousands of Asians from Uganda by Idi Amin in 1972, which many members of the Canadian Jamat experienced firsthand. Prince Sadruddin also widened the UNHCR's mandate from serving refugees from Europe alone to also include refugees from Palestine, Vietnam, Angola, Algeria, Lebanon, Kuwait, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Iraq. When he addressed the United Nations in 1967 in a speech, he explained that, quote, refugees can be a great asset to their new country if they can be included in the constructive work of development rather than being allowed to remain in idleness in the camps, end quote. In closing, I hope this segment might help you to reflect on how your soul is part of a shared cosmological migration from heaven to earth, to recount how you have received divine support through difficulties just as the prophets and early Muslims did, to recall how you or those you know benefited from the very refugee infrastructure shaped by Imam Sultan Muhammad Shah and Prince Sadruddin, and lastly, how you can amplify and maximize your support of the vulnerable without desire for thanks or desire for reward, just like Ahmed, the Syrian refugees in Greece, and the many Jamati members involved in refugee resettlement show us so beautifully every day. I'll leave you with the advice Hazrat Ali offered to Malik al-Ashtar on his appointment as governor of Egypt, because this advice is timeless and it applies to all of us even today. He said, quote, treat them with mercy, love, kindness, and forgiveness, for they are of two types, either your brother in religion or your like in creation. Through them, he, God, tests you, end quote. Thank you so very much, and Yali Madat.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal, for sharing the historical and faith perspectives of migration in the Ummah. Next, we will hear from Al-Rahim Moosa. Al-Rahim, currently Unit Manager of FOCUS Humanitarian Assistance based in Lebanon. Previously, Al-Rahim served as the Senior Program and Acting Head of Emergency Management based in Toronto. In his current role, Al-Rahim ensures that refugees and other displaced persons have access to safety and stability in places including Syria and Lebanon. Al-Rahim, thank you so much for joining us this evening. So you were embedded in Syria from 2015 to 2019. What kind of work did FOCUS undertake in Syria during that time?
Well, thank you, Conwell, for having me on Friday Night Reflections. It's a real honor to be here. So yes, correct. I was in Syria from 2015 to 2019. And that particular period was actually about 3 or 4 years after the war in Syria had begun. And so by that point in time, actually around 2014, the situation for the Jamat in Salamieh, where the Jamat is concentrated, had considerably worsened. So up until that point, Salamieh, I'll just give some background on the area. Salamieh is based in central Syria, and it was home to about 120,000 people, most of which were Jamat, prior to the crisis in Syria. And by 2015, that number had inflated to about 300,000. And that was because people from all over Syria were being displaced to Salamieh for safe haven. And so when FOCUS began our intervention in 2015, we took a two-pronged approach, basically. One was to deal with the deteriorating security situation around Salamieh. So up until that point, it had, like I said, served as a safe haven for the people that were within it. But around Salamieh, there was an increasing presence of hostile actors, non-state armed groups. We also call them extremist groups that were attempting to essentially inflict physical damage and conduct takeovers of these areas to basically obtain that land and exercise control over it. So one of the two-pronged components we did was emergency management, and that entails responding through the community to any incidents of violence or disaster. So, for example, a rocket attack. A rocket would land in the city center or in a village on the outskirts. And we built first aid teams and search and rescue teams and casualty transport teams made of the Jamat and the wider community to provide on-site first aid and to move the casualty to a medical point nearby or to the hospital if need be. And the second thing we did within that component was evacuation planning. So in the event that the situation got so bad within a particular area, whether in Salamieh district or within one of the villages within the district, we essentially built evacuation plans to move people, vulnerable people without access to transportation, to a safe spot elsewhere in the district or another part of Syria that was safe. So that was the emergency management component. And the second component was humanitarian assistance. So as I said earlier, a lot of the work was around supporting the Jamat with basic needs. So again, food baskets, access to healthcare, covering their rent. And we just found that after doing multiple needs assessment in coordination with other actors on the ground, that need kept growing. Why? Because of the deteriorating economic situation. The value of the Syrian currency was deteriorating with time, and so people could not afford their basic needs. So we used our resources to essentially fill that gap, to basically keep food on the table, keep children in school, allow university students to go to university, and meet other basic needs in order to keep life going. And the overall goal of this approach was to prevent further displacement. Typically in a war situation, when you have an escalation in violence or you can no longer meet your basic needs, you are looking to travel elsewhere within the country or leave the country altogether. And the goal here was to prevent that further displacement. So by protecting the physical integrity of the Jamat and the wider community, as well as giving them access to their needs, we were trying to keep them safe where they were, given the historical importance of Salamieh and as a base for which the Jamat has lived in since time immemorial.
Such amazing work that FOCUS undertook in Syria. Currently, there is a community of Afghan Ismailis in Turkey. So how did that community come to Turkey? Why Turkey? And what work is FOCUS doing to help those individuals?
So as most people are aware, there was a mass movement of civilians from Syria and Afghanistan principally, but also parts of Africa as well and Central and South Asia during 2015 and 2016. And that was due to the invitation by some Western European states for refugees to come and claim asylum in their countries with the view to permanent residence for the long term. And so there were about 10,000 Marids from the Syrian and Afghan Jamat that participated in that journey to Western Europe to seek asylum. And that the entire cohort of people that moved within that time period was about 1 million. As you may recall, Germany accepted 1 million asylum seekers, and other European states also accepted marginally smaller numbers. And so we had a large cohort of the Jamat within that contingent as well, seeking asylum in Western Europe. In the course of that movement, the EU and Turkey decided that it had come to a point where the numbers moving across were unsustainable, and that something had to be done to stem the flow of people coming in. So what happened was that a lot of Jamat were in transit from Afghanistan and Syria, but got stuck in Turkey because they could no longer make that sea trek across the Mediterranean to claim asylum in Greece. And so we noticed that we ran a data collection and survey in Turkey last year, and we found that there were up to 5,000 Marids, about 1,100 households total in Turkey, waiting for the opportunity to somehow be resettled. So just sheer size of that number, I mean, it basically required an intervention of FOCUS to do something. And I'm just going to couch that within the wider picture as well. That 5,000 cohort of Afghan Jamat is part of 200,000 large number of Afghans in Turkey in general. And there's a very small number of Syrians in Turkey, Syrian Jamat in Turkey rather. But the number of Syrians in Turkey in general numbers about 3.5 to 4 million. So that gives you an understanding of the sheer number of refugees that Turkey is hosting. Okay, so going back to the Jamati component, about 5,000 in total, The first thing that we did was, as I said, was collect data. So we essentially disseminated a form and distributed it through key informants on the ground that we used to basically collect data about the Jamat. When they arrived in Turkey, where they were from in Afghanistan, and what their needs were, okay? So we found that most of the Jamat were working in difficult labor conditions, so they did not have stable jobs and stable income, and nor were those jobs actually safe. They were working in heavy construction jobs or in some kind of labor that actually subjected them to exploitation on a constant basis. We found that there were critical healthcare needs amongst the Jamat that they developed in Turkey or were chronic conditions from Afghanistan. And we also found that for most of them, the prospect of returning to Afghanistan was very slim. And as you're aware, the situation in Afghanistan has recently worsened quite a bit with the advance of the Taliban throughout the country. And so we knew that the prospects of them going back were quite slim. And I'll just touch on one more thing about the Jamat situation there, is that we refer to them as refugees, and that is the right way to refer to them. But in Turkey, they're considered international protection holders. Essentially, they are not given refugee status the same way other refugees are, because the government of Turkey wants to avoid having people of Afghan origin settle indefinitely on Turkish soil. At some point, they're going to want them to either go to Afghanistan or move onwards. And by not giving them that full refugee status, they do not have to meet the obligation to fully settle refugees on their soil. So what that means in practice is that Afghans, and including our Jamat, are not able to obtain a long-term residency. They're not able to obtain healthcare insurance after 1 year. They're not able to obtain access to legal work because there is no incentive for a Turkish employer to legally hire an Afghan when they can do it under the radar without penalty. So there's a lot of structural challenges facing the Afghan community and the Jamat, for which FOCUS is now looking for some kind of sustainable solution. And another thing that we're doing actually through the Council for Canada is English language programming. So the idea here is, in cooperation with the Future Ready initiative, is supporting the Jamat to use their time productively to learn English in order to increase and enhance their opportunities, whether those are in Turkey or whether they do end up resettling to other countries or even going back to Afghanistan. So we are now investing through mediums like WhatsApp and certain learning software to get the Jamat to learn English and practice amongst each other, so that they can unlock other pathways of migration, as well as unlock those opportunities if they're resident in Turkey for some time.
So speaking of irregular movement, and referencing back to what you were mentioning about just the movement of refugees, there are some Ismailis who have left Syria or Afghanistan and have resettled in Western Europe. Does FOCUS offer services to those Ismailis that have resettled?
Yes, absolutely. So as I said previously, we had about 10,000 Marids in total that made their way to Western Europe, taking that dangerous sea trek across the Mediterranean, and beginning in Greece and then moving through Europe to claim asylum in Germany, Sweden, Belgium, France, and other countries within Europe. And so FOCUS's intervention there began in 2015 as well. And the first component of that was again, legal status, making sure that Jamat that had arrived had some kind of residency permit to allow them to stay in the country and access basic services, enroll in vocational training, enroll in language classes, and eventually integrate. But that first step, again, is a matter of protection, making sure that when they arrive, they understand how to claim asylum. They want to be convinced that the threat was particular to you, that you weren't fleeing just because everybody else was fleeing. They want to be able to see a real risk to your life and limb, that you could no longer stay there or move elsewhere within the country. And from that point on, it was about sustaining that status. So a lot of countries, as they started receiving more and more refugees and asylum seekers, the numbers of people that they accepted for that status started to dwindle. And so you started to see more and more rejections. So a lot of it was about, and particularly in a country like Germany, it was about what could the Murid do? What could they invest in to demonstrate that they were willing to integrate into Germany? So you'll see that the case is now that there should be a demonstrated commitment by the individual to learn a vocation, to learn the language, and to make an effort essentially to stay. And so a lot of FOCUS's work with the national councils as well was to essentially help the Murid enroll in some kind of course that was possibly aligned with their educational background, and get to a decent level of language understanding that they could actually use it, at least in conversation. And then if at that point in time, for example, 1 or 2 years into their settlement in Germany or whichever country they're in, they could show the immigration officer that they're actually making this effort and be able to stay or obtain even a permanent form of residency status. So that became a critical component as well. After the peak of the migration to these countries, and after the sort of influx stopped, for now it's all been about that long-term integration. And for those who are there with their families, it's all about getting to that next level of language to be able to move up in their career paths. Now, for example, if they're in a vocation, maybe they can look at something along their own career paths, a profession that they practice in Syria, for example, medicine, pharmacy, law, engineering, or architecture. There's actually the prospects of doing that again in these countries if they've been able to have their credentials recognized and get to that level of language. So now it's all about that long-term integration and improving their quality of life to that next level, to be able to stay there and live decently. So that's what the FOCUS is working on now in close coordination with the national councils, is that long-term settlement and integration. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Al-Rahim. Thank you so much for the time that you gave us this evening.
Thank you so much, Kanwal, to you and to the whole team at Friday Night Reflections. It was really an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Al-Rahim, for that insight on the important work that FOCUS Humanitarian Assistance is currently undertaking. As Al-Rahim describes, disasters of a variety of causes continue to impact the Jamat. For over 25 years, FOCUS Humanitarian Assistance and FOCUS Canada has been actively supporting at-risk communities mitigate risks, minimize vulnerabilities, and build resilience. This has only been possible with the support of our generous Jamat. The annual FOCUS Star campaign is currently underway, and the Jamat is encouraged to participate and donate at focusstar.ca. For newly arrived members of the Jamat to Canada, the settlement portfolio offers services and programming to support Jamat who have newly immigrated to Canada to establish a strong foundation for long-term quality of life and enable their successful integration into Canadian society. The settlement portfolio's services aim to support the Jamat as they go through the 4 phases of the settlement process. The first is pre-arrival, where Murids are either still in their country of origin, or if they are refugees, it may be in their first country of asylum. The second is the newly arrived phase, covering their first year in Canada. The third phase is newly settled, covering years 2 to 3. And the fourth phase is settled, which involves years 4 and beyond. Please feel free to reach out to members of the settlement portfolio through the access line. I will now be joined by Council for Canada President Ameerally Kassim-Lakha for a discussion on how the Jamat has settled in Canada, how we have fared through the COVID-19 pandemic, and what we can look forward to in the future. Thank you so much, President Ameerally Kassim-Lakha, for joining us this evening. So, with the past immigration of the Jamat to Canada, what has been the primary driver of the successful settlement of the Jamat?
You know, Kanwal, when I think about the Jamat settlement and what has been the primary driver of success, I have to say it's unquestionably the guidance and blessing of our beloved Haj Imam. You know, from the outset, he emphasized to the Jamat in Canada in parallel education and career excellence, but he also encouraged entrepreneurship. Dating back to the 70s, Hazimam made the decision that he wanted to, in Canada, create entrepreneurship support programs, such as there was a loan guarantee program, there was an equity joint ventures program through IPS, Industrial Promotion Services at the time, and business information offices to guide the Jamat across the country. And Hazimam took these particular steps to help the Jamat settle down so that the Jamat would be focusing in parallel on education and career development and excellence, but at the same time on developing an entrepreneurial base. And that was a very, very important step. But when we step back, I think we have to recognize that the prerequisite to successful settlement in Canada is English or French language literacy. Without literacy, the trajectory to successful settlement is very, very difficult. The Jamat has to recognize this. Early investment in vocational training is also critical. Today, the approach we are taking is to integrate language and vocational training backwards. We are working, as an example, with potential immigrants to commence training before they arrive through online programs which they can pursue in their home countries. We all know that immigration wait times are long, so there's a tremendous opportunity to optimize learning pre-arrival so that the Jamat can hit the ground running when they arrive. So it's really a combination of things. It's educational excellence, it's entrepreneurship, but it starts with language training and investment in vocational training upfront for those who need it.
You're so right about learning English and French as being one of the primary or the most important steps to successfully integrating into Canadian society. And Shukr, we've been blessed with Maulana Hazimam's guidance throughout our settlement here. As you know, 2022 marks 50 years since the first major settlement of the Jamat in Canada. What do you see as the major challenges facing the Jamat as we head into the next century of our presence in this country?
I think that the challenges that we're going to face, and we're probably going to face them for many decades ahead, are in a way spurred by or accelerated by COVID. They were already there. They were part of the context of Canada, of the globe, in fact. But COVID has put a real spotlight on it. There are really two things I want to talk about in terms of challenges for the Jamat, for individuals and for families. The first is to gain clarity with respect to future careers and business opportunities. This is very important, and we have been emphasizing this to the Jamat repeatedly. It's important to transition in a timely way to growth opportunities of the future. And we are supporting the Jamat through our Future of Work and Future of Business initiatives. We're taking, as the Jamat is aware, a multi-pronged approach to connect Jamat to industry leaders so that they can learn from industry leaders. We're providing individual counseling for those who need counseling or request counseling. And we're encouraging micro-credentialing, short courses that have become available as a result of COVID at an unprecedented level that can help people redirect their careers based on how they are analyzing the future of work and their own situation. This challenge is going to remain for a few decades. So I think that's one of the things that we have to prepare for. The other challenge I would want to highlight is mental health. It's a generational issue across the globe, affecting communities everywhere, creating stresses everywhere. These stresses are rooted in modern life, but they're compounded by the social isolation that COVID has created. Again, we are taking a multi-pronged approach to support the Jamat. One of the first things we've started doing, is encouraging conversation and acceptance of mental health conditions. We need to talk about this. We need to be comfortable talking about these within our families, amongst our peers, amongst our friends, because unless we have conversations around the things that are troubling us, we will not be able to remove stigma. We need to minimize stigma as a starting point. The second approach is to encourage timely access to care. It's important that the Jamaat have preferred access to care and that they access care as soon as they require it or it becomes evident. And then the last thing is building resilience in families. I think it's very important for the Jamaat to have mental health literacy. And what do I mean by mental health literacy? Jamaat has to be aware of mental health conditions, what are the options, what are the symptoms, and when there is need to take action. You know, mental health issues are prevalent across all demographics. It's how we navigate them. This is what we want. We want to be able to support the Jamaat in being able to navigate issues. And this also is going to be an issue that's going to remain for many decades. So I would say that mental health and the future of work, the future of business, will be the primary concerns of the Jamaat in the decades to come.
So keeping those two challenges aside that you see for the next 50 years, what do you see as the best opportunities that lie before us?
You know, when I think of opportunity, I think of some of the guidances of Maulana Hazar Imam related to the role that the Canadian Jamaat can play in a global context. You know, Canada, and there are really two things. There's promoting pluralist values in a broader context, and there's building institutional capacity. Canada, let's talk about pluralist values. Canada, including the Jamaat, and especially the Jamaat, can play a significant role in strengthening pluralist values across the globe. There's broad respect for the Canadian example. As an illustration, there's great admiration for our values when we engage in service assignments outside of Canada. There's a lot of respect for Canadians. But I think the key opportunity for us lies in education. Developing and implementing curricula that emphasize pluralist values from early childhood development, that early stage, and setting a pluralistic context for education. This is critical. And even in Canada, there's tremendous opportunity through education to promote pluralism. So I would say that's the first opportunity, and I know that it ranks very high in Maulana Hazar Imam's priorities and his aspirations for the Canadian Jamaat. The second opportunity is one that I think has been consistent in his direction to the Canadian Jamaat. From the time that Maulana Hazar Imam first visited the Jamaat in the 70s, he has been emphasizing that the Canadian Jamaat can be a platform for continuing development for the Jamaats around the globe. We can continue to play a very significant role in building institutional capacity in countries where institutions are nascent. And what do I mean by that? Hazar Imam is still creating more institutions, appointing new boards where the need is there in the Jamaat, as an example. Hazar Imam's approach to alleviate poverty, illness, weakness, and conflict, and this is what he is always aiming to do. He wants to alleviate poverty, illness, weakness, and conflict. His approach is to continue investing in programs in education, health, economic development, and pluralism in countries of concern. And the connection is very clear. Poverty, education, illness, health, weakness, economic development, and conflict, pluralism. This is how the Imamate underwrites quality of life. In all of this, the Canadian Jamaat can contribute to these programs through sharing best practices. And I think a very good example is professional development, where many of our volunteers are making outstanding contributions today. You know, I'll give you an example. There are many Jamati members who in their professions are providing professional development opportunities, having conversations with their counterparts and colleagues in other parts of the world to further develop their professional capabilities and capacities. These are things we're able to do from the comfort of our homes in the context of COVID. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for Canadians to continue building institutional capacity in other parts of the world in the decades to come.
Along those lines, President Saib, where would you like to see the Jamat in 50 years?
I think we would like to see the Jamat highly connected with Jamats globally, working together, building global capacity together, and creating opportunities for Jamat wherever they reside. You know, the Jamat has heard Hazrat Imam's farmans on countries of opportunity, that he wants Jamat to have access to opportunity wherever they reside. And this is something that we can support the Jamats with. I think that would be the first thing. The second I think outcome one would desire, if we're looking over a 5-decade time span, is the Canadian Jamat playing a role in achieving a deeper understanding of the humanistic values of our faith. This is already happening, but there is an opportunity to strengthen our efforts, to deepen our efforts. We can, as a Jamat, have a much greater impact. And we have the institutional platform, we have the institutional capacity, we have institutions such as the museum, the Global Center for Pluralism, that can really help us as a foundation. And then I think over the next 50 years, there's an opportunity for even stronger representation at the forefront in Canada, at the forefront of business, government, academia, innovation, civil society. I think this has been Maulana Hazrat Imam's aspiration from the outset. He expressed these aspirations again in the 70s, in the 80s, that he wanted to see the Jamat at the forefront of Canadian life. We have made significant progress, and I think that we can continue to make progress, and there's an opportunity to continue to emerge at the forefront of different spheres of life in Canada.
As you know, the FOCUS campaign is currently underway. Why is the work of FOCUS so important?
You know, FOCUS is involved in addressing many priorities in the Jamat. There's so many aspects to FOCUS's work. Some of the key things that FOCUS is doing is supporting communities that are displaced due to conflict or other forms of instability. And through COVID, these communities have become even more vulnerable. The priority has become food security, shelter, and basic medicines for people who haven't been able to go to work every day, as an example. And so FOCUS's mandate through COVID has amplified. We're concerned particularly about communities that are stranded outside of their home countries and need to resettle. They are even more vulnerable. Another area where FOCUS is working is natural disasters, which impact our communities across the globe. FOCUS supports at-risk communities through emergency preparation and post-disaster reconstruction. This is important work. It's very important work, and it involves large communities. But in a Canadian context, FOCUS is helping the Jamat to come out of COVID through this particular crisis, through mental health supports, career preparation, mentoring of families and youth. FOCUS's mandate in Canada has amplified because we need to make sure that the Jamat even emerges from this crisis, and FOCUS is playing a very significant role here in Canada.
Such important work that FOCUS is undertaking both around the world and in Canada. What support are you hoping for during the current FOCUS campaign?
I think we have to help the Jamat recover from COVID. That's the priority. Maulana Hazrat Imam wants the Jamat to emerge from COVID stronger than before. This is absolutely paramount. And we have to be deliberate about this. We have to make the right choices and offer programs to the Jamat to emerge stronger. It's not going to happen otherwise. We have to be very clear and deliberate in our thinking, in our planning. And I think one example is the Future Ready initiative, which can help the Jamat catapult out of this crisis. We are, through the Future Ready initiative, offering a range of counseling services to the Jamat. We're offering retraining opportunities. We're offering networking platforms such as 10,000 Chais. I just spoke to the Jamat last week about this, to help the Jamat plan and reimagine a new future. This is what the FOCUS campaign is about. It's about helping the Jamat reimagining their future.
So with this, the season finale of Friday Night Reflections and the ushering in, inshallah, of a new stage in the pandemic, as you look back on the past 16 months, do you have any thoughts or reflections you'd like to share on how the Jamat has navigated through this crisis?
You know, I'll tell you, the leadership in Canada has the deepest respect for the Jamat's patience at every stage of the pandemic. The Jamat has shown exceptional resilience, exceptional understanding. Throughout Jamat Khana openings, closings, changes in capacity, adherence to protocols, the Jamat has been considerate, it's been supportive, and we want to recognize that. Our volunteers have rendered outstanding services, and we owe them our deep gratitude. The spirit of community has been outstanding. You know, there's an expression, necessity is the mother of invention. Our volunteers have established impactful programs in a short time span to support the Jamat. You think of the access lines, Sukoon, Friday Night Reflections, other digital activities that the Jamat engaged in, so many initiatives that have had an impact on the Jamat and helped the Jamat through the crisis. This has been carried out by our volunteers. Our communications team have taught us the art of the possible in keeping community together. They have done some excellent work. And I think we have to recognize all of these accomplishments of our volunteers through this period of the pandemic.
So, looking forward, what portends for the future?
You know, I keep thinking about priorities that Imam has expressed for the Canadian Jamat. And I would say that there are perhaps 3 or 4 key areas that are going to determine our success. And foundational to all of this is quality early childhood development. It's something that needs to be highlighted. This is the foundation for the next generation and for rooting out generations of marginalization or poverty in families that might be impacted. Quality ECD puts in motion a trajectory for excellence. Researchers, Canadian researchers, are telling us that 80% of the adult intellect is formed by the age of 6. We can't miss this opportunity. Parents can't miss this opportunity, and this is something that is a priority for our beloved Imam, for the Canadian Jamat and other Jamats. I would say equally, in a Canadian context but other contexts, emergency preparedness. It is critical for our safety and economic well-being. The question is not if, but when we'll be impacted by another crisis. The recent forest fires in BC are an example. Emergency planning does not eliminate risk, but it mitigates risk. So I would say that emergency planning is an important endeavor moving forward. Planning for aging. Imam has been bringing this up since the Golden Jubilee. He's been emphasizing it again and again, that longevity is increasing and planning is required to ensure quality of life through the aging continuum. It doesn't just happen. It needs planning. It needs deliberate choices to be made. So these are some of the things I would like to highlight for the Jamat, because I think that there are things that Imam has made the leadership think about, and we'd like to share these things with the Jamat. So the Jamat is aware of why it is that we are focused on these particular initiatives.
Thank you so much, President Saib, for the time that you gave us this evening.
No, it's my pleasure. You know, I want to acknowledge the tremendous work that's been done by all the hosts on Friday Night Reflections and the entire team, through putting up the program over the last 16 months and consistently keeping the Jamat together. I know that the team will be taking a break for a few weeks as we approach this point in the summer, so that everybody has some downtime, and this is the last episode of this particular season. But inshallah, we will restart Friday Night Reflections in the fall, and we look forward to connecting with the Jamat again. But I want to thank all the volunteers who've done tremendous work through COVID for 16 months, consistently, every Friday, in putting up great programs, consistently. And this is a tremendous accomplishment on the part of the volunteers. So thank you.
Thank you, President Saib. Thank you, President Saib, for those thoughts and insights. Before we end tonight's program, I would like to spend a moment to recognize that this is the season finale of Friday Night Reflections. For 67 weeks, Friday Night Reflections has aimed to provide a touch point for the Jamat in response to the measures required by the COVID-19 pandemic. With the pandemic receding, we will be taking a few weeks to develop a program to keep the Jamat engaged and informed on the work of the Imamat commencing in the fall. Friday Night Reflections is a production that requires hours of work each week to organize, edit, translate, and produce. The volunteers who put this show together, the hosts and guests who give so generously of their time, and you who tune in each week are integral to making this resource available for the Jamat. So thank you to you and the entire team who put Friday Night Reflections together each week. Merci à vous tous et à toute l'équipe qui travaille si fort sur les Friday Night Reflections à chaque semaine. If you're interested, past episodes of Friday Night Reflections are available at iicanada.org/FNR. Now it's time for musical expressions. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon. Au revoir and Ya Ali Madad.
Diversity, plurality, पर एक है हम सारे. We live in different cities and countries, पर एक है हम सारे. अलग है ज़बानें, अलग है लिबास, पर एक है जज़्बा. हम एक हैं, हम साथ साथ. We are together. अलग है जुबाने, अलग है लिबास, पर एक है जज्बा. Whenever I look into your eyes, whenever I feel the warmth of your smiles, I remember that in this sky we are many rays from the same light. Kale hum giriya sari चले आसमां की सारी, बादल से बरसे बारिश नूरानी, बड़ी खुशियाँ और एकता हमारी. چمن دست به دست، عطر سمن با آن چمن. وقتی سحر رنگ برنگ، نوری شفاق با چشم دل، با چشم دل نوری شفاق، اشکا با گناه ها روان. سوز یکی با سینه ها، یاد یکی بر لبان. Nous chantons, nous dansons
nous brillons comme les étoiles dans le ciel. Nous chantons, nous dansons, nous brillons de lumière. Rangilu maru dil thai gayo re. Rangilu maru dil thai gayo re. Ek tani tum par judi rayo re. Rangilu maru dil thai gayo re. Bhasha alag che पहरवेश अलग पर सावरों से हम एक है हम साथ साथ we are together one Jamat हम एक है हम साथ साथ we are together one Jamat हम एक है हम साथ साथ